everyone. Thank you so much for making the time to join us here today. I am Lisa Tepper-Bates, President and CEO of United Way of Connecticut, and we thank you so much for joining us for ALICE Advocacy in Action, a recap of the 2024 legislative session. And I can tell from the guest list that not only are we joined today by hardworking service providers, passionate advocates, and dedicated legislators, but we're also joined by members of our team here at United Way of Connecticut, and we're glad to see all of you. Thanks again for making the time. And before we go too far into today's session, just a few notes on housekeeping. We are recording this webinar, and we'll plan to post it to our YouTube page. We hope you'll share that with others in the community who might not have been able to be here today. We've also enabled the chat function, and we'd really appreciate it if you can use that to introduce yourselves, share your ideas, ask questions, and contribute throughout the webinar. We'd really like to hear from you. The closed caption function is also enabled, and please know you can select from a variety of languages for the captions if you click the up arrow icon next to the show captions icon. If you have any technical issues, please contact Cheryl Hardgrave on our team who's here with us today, and she'll be glad to be of help to you. As many of you here know, but it bears repeating, ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. ALICE households are the backbone of our communities, and the Connecticut United Ways are proud for over a decade to have brought to Connecticut the data, the facts around ALICE, which tell us what it costs to live here and help us understand who is struggling and why. ALICE is the medical assistant at your local hospital. ALICE is a teacher at your local daycare. ALICE is the cashier at your grocery store, or the bus driver who takes your kids to school or to summer camp. ALICE is working as hard as they can at the jobs available to them in our state, but are simply not paid enough to cover the ever-growing cost of living here in our great state. Inflation is rising for everyday essentials, not at the same rate it did at that very high rate, but still rising nonetheless. Those essentials include food and housing, where we've seen such steep increases in the costs. And this is hitting ALICE families very hard in the state of Connecticut. This is the story for 39% of all households in our state. It's 500,000 families who can't make ends meet, and we find them in every zip code and every community in Connecticut. Advocacy for and with ALICE families is one of the ways that we at United Way of Connecticut, and together with our colleagues, seek to advance our mission across the network of Connecticut United Ways, and again, with our partners in the nonprofit world and with citizens who've joined with us. Now that our state has concluded the 2024 legislative session, we're eager to share with you what today we think about when we think about the progress we've made. Many of you here have been central in advocacy around the issues we're going to talk about today, and we thank you for your hard work, for bringing people along, for helping us make the case on things that can and should be done to make life easier for ALICE families. And we hope that what you learned today helps to not only keep you informed about what happened during this past legislative session, but we hope that we all leave here motivated to keep going and to keep looking for those improvements in Connecticut that can better help ALICE families to thrive. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Daniel Fitzmaurice, United Way of Connecticut's Director of Advocacy, for an update on our 2024 policy agenda.
Thanks, Lisa, and it's great to sort of see everybody. I'm going to also keep passing the mic along to a few folks who have been on the ground, involved in our policy agenda this year. So our first priority that we're going to cover today is the need for an additional investment in 211. To help us out, please welcome Tanya Barrett, the SVP of 211 Health and Human Services at the United Way of Connecticut. Hey, Tanya.
Hi, Daniel.
So, as I've come to learn in the couple of months I've been here, there are many different services Connecticut residents can access in a one-stop place when they call 211. So that's why our priority this year is focused on the information and referral services. So can you just first give us a sense of what that entails?
Yeah, thanks for raising this up, Daniel. Information and referral is a core part of our 211 work, and it's the work that our contact specialists do to connect residents with more than 40,000 different resources. And they do this by phone or through live chat over the computer. So many times they're helping folks to access the additional supports that they never even knew existed. And it's, a light bulb comes on when people figure out that 211 is there when they don't know where to turn. Mm-hmm. In addition to this core work, our information and referral, we also offer specialty service teams. But here today, I just want to highlight how important the core work of information referral is. And it really represents the backbone of our 211 program in Connecticut.
Oh, I'm going to borrow that, the backbone. So despite this being the backbone, the service itself for information and referral has been flat funded for 14 years. And despite our asks, we did not get the additional 1.25 million in the budget as we hoped for. So bring it down to the level of an Alice family. What does that flat funding mean for an Alice family?
Yeah, unfortunately for Alice families, it means longer wait times is really what it translates to. Because of the flat funding and increased cost, we've had to reduce the number of staff that we can have available on the phones. And, when we think about Alice families, we know that they're often fitting in a call in between jobs. We know that they're trying to do it before they leave to pick their child up from daycare. And so they really have immediate needs. And the result is that many Alice families don't access the benefits that they're eligible for and just don't know about that would actually help them thrive.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you've got a captive audience of advocates here. In a few words, what do you want them to carry forward into advocating for 211 in the future?
Yeah, I would love for people to know that we handled 1.7 million inquiries, which is an increase of 20% in calls and 20 times the number of online requests since 2018. So the demand is growing. We strive to keep our wait times as low as possible. We'd love to be at the 5-minute mark for information and referral, but it's really hard given the growing demand and the staffing constraints. But we know that this service can be a real lifeline for families. And we just want to make sure that people know that our capacity is really reduced when we're continually flat funded. And we're appreciative for the support and for people lifting this up.
Oh, thanks, Tanya. And thanks for that, I know brief, but to the point update. And there's more information on our website and also tools to contact their local legislators even now about the 211 funding. So thanks so much. Next, we're going to cover a priority we've had for a number of years about expanding access to no-cost school meals. And there's no one better to help us out with that than Lucy Nolan, the policy director at End Hunger Connecticut. And Lucy, we know that school meals are an incredible force multiplier, helping kids and families with their mental health and nutrition and academics. But putting that aside, what do Alice families need to know about the situation at their lunchrooms moving forward?
Well, it's I have to say it's been a roller coaster since COVID, because what we did learn was that our families really needed free school meals for all of their kids, and it continued. This year we were lucky that the governor put in his budget continued funding for school breakfast for all and reduced price and free meals for reduced priced eligible kids. Unfortunately, because the legislature didn't work on a budget, there was no money put into it for this year, but we were able to get money so that any student who is eligible for reduced price meals, which would be anyone from a family of four, income of 55,500 pre-tax dollars, would get their meals for free. Next year
Yep.
it'll be up a little bit higher. So it is something that's helpful. I think could be problematic for our Alice families though, because there's a big gap between what the basic survival budget is and $55,000 pre-tax.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. So that's critical for Alice families in particular who would be reduced, would continue to get that free lunch for a year. Can you tell me more about the breakfast again? What should families expect for breakfast, just to be very clear, moving into next year?
To be very clear, that there will not be no cost breakfast for all. None. That will be if a child wants to get breakfast, it'll have to be paid for if they don't, if they're not eligible for free meals.
All right. Well, definitely then we've got some work to do. And again,
Yes.
as I asked Tanya, we've got a great team here of advocates and allies working every day to help Alice families become more stable. So what do you want them to know moving forward? How can we help moving forward to expand no-cost school meals?
I think one of the biggest things that we can do is make sure that our legislators understand how important the meals are to our families and what a lifeline they are for many of them. The funding was through continued of ARPA funds. So that money will not be available to schools next year. So really, we will have to increase funding for this in our state budget. And I think that's critical, that we all need, we had an extraordinary coalition. I have to tell you, we had so many people sign on and so many organizations, and we're going to just keep going at it and hope everyone and more people join in. And I have to say the United Way has been just fantastic in working on this. So thank you.
Well, we follow your lead and we're definitely on it with you. And just to underscore the point too, you mentioned the American Rescue Plan Act funds, which at this point have all been spent. So you're absolutely right. We're all going to have to fight for a permanent type of structure for funding the important things we know Alice families need. Thanks, Lucy. And we're going to—
I just add one more thing, Daniel, sorry. And I just want to make sure that people understand that Maine and Vermont and Massachusetts have universal school meals, and New York feeds almost all of their kids. So we are the outlier here. New Hampshire and Connecticut.
I love that, because if you think about it from an Alice family, you could just be one border away and be having no-cost school meals. And I think that's something we all deserve. So thanks for your work, Lucy, and thanks for joining us. Our final priority we're going to cover right now is our priority to cover a fully refundable statewide child tax credit. It would give Alice parents $600 per child to spend on whatever their family needs most. We know that raising a child's expensive, but again, the cost of the basics, even just the basics, are continuing to rise. And we had been able to mobilize 4,000 messages of support this session together, but our legislators did not end up passing the child tax credit this session. So kind of like Lucy said, we do remain the only state with an income tax that doesn't adjust to help raise families. So this will certainly be a priority for us next year, because we know it's a powerful solution for Alice families. And to share her perspective on this policy, we invited one of our Alice advocates from this year, Maria Nunez, to join us. Maria lives in Hartford. She's a single mom and works as a medical interpreter at her local hospital, which is actually where she is right now, working. So rather than joining us today, we pre-recorded a quick interview to share with you.
So before we talk about the policy side of it, I just want to get some perspective from you. How would have receiving $600 per child made a difference for you and your family?
Well, if that were to actually come to light, come true, $600 for every child. And my situation, it would be $1,200. So $1,200 that I could plan ahead. I could plan ahead and say, okay, tax season, I can plan ahead for the next school year. I can plan ahead. Okay, so I don't have to worry about say their back to school clothes, their equipment for their sports, or buying their coats for the winter. So there's so many things that I could plan ahead and not have to worry about it. So $1,200 would make a huge difference and make a difference. So not only in your pocket, and when I say in your pocket is having to budget for future expenses, but it also gives you a mental
Yeah.
relief. It's a mental relief also. So it does impact you in many different ways.
I think lots of different parents would connect with that concept of worry and not feeling prepared, feeling like they're constantly trying to play catch up financially.
Trying to just guess to see how we're gonna make, ends meet at the end of the month or at the end of the year. So,
Yeah. Well, regrettably, as you know, because we've been talking, this Connecticut Child Tax Credit was not established this year for a number of reasons. But again, just more from a practical perspective, what does not having that kind of policy in place, mean for your family? What does that mean in an everyday basis?
I would say it means a lot to all the families because we're not only thinking about like me and my children. I'm soon to be a grandmother, and
That's right.
hey, thank you. Hey, thankfully, she's doing well now, but it doesn't mean that she's going to be doing well forever. I mean, I want it that way, but you never know what life brings and what challenges come your way. And even thinking about not only my children, so I think about my neighbors, I think about my friends, I think about people that I know are struggling. So just to put a plate of food on their tables. So it's it has to happen. To me, this has to happen. So let's stop putting band-aids around and thinking that the problem is going to go away. It's not going to go away. So things are getting more and more expensive. So
Sure.
everything, gas, utilities, food. So just basic straight up necessities that we use every day. So going to the grocery store nowadays is a luxury. 'Cause
Right.
sometimes it used to be fun, you pick up your sweets and your stuff, but now you gotta forget about the sweets and
Yeah, you
grab the
gotta
meat.
make harder choices. And I love your
Yeah.
point that this isn't, it's about everybody, right?
About everyone,
your
not about myself.
neighbors, folks across every zip code. And like I said, one last question. I know you're very committed, like thousands of other Alice advocates are. And we've got this great crowd here today who we want to keep fighting with you. So, what keeps you motivated about this work? What do you want them to know to stay motivated so that we can pass the Connecticut Child Tax Credit next session?
I say stay motivated because it's a generational situation. So poverty isn't going to go away. Poverty isn't going to take a break. It's only going to get worse and worse. So, and I feel like I think I'm doing or putting in my little grain of sand by, stepping forward and participating in these conversations. So I would want to think that the people in the right places, okay, would also, contribute their little grain of sand, not only for the present generations, but for the future generations of Connecticut.
I think we can carry some sand with you, Maria. Thank you so
Uh,
much for spending a
Thank
little time
you.
with me.
Thanks, Maria. from afar, but I hope that gives you all a sense of just how critical establishing a child tax credit is to Alice families and all our families, as Maria said. So now we've gone through our full policy agenda, and I'm excited to hand the mic over to Lisa and an incredible panelist to talk about all these other policies from this legislative session. And again, talk more about how Alice households are going to be impacted by those changes. Hey, Lisa.
Thank you, Daniel, and we're so grateful for the advocacy of Maria and for so many other Alice households and colleagues for our policy agenda. And the United Ways across Connecticut will be working together to develop our new 2025 policy agenda, many of these items carried forward, and we're very proud to work in coalition with partners like Lucy, partners like Maria on those items. But for now, what we want to do is actually sort of widen together the lens and think about other advances that happened this last legislative session, and to help us think about Alice and what else happened in Connecticut that we hope will make her life, their lives better. I'm honored to welcome a couple of my colleagues and friends, Janae Woods-Weber, Executive Director of She Leads Justice, and Eva Bermudez-Zimmerman, Coalition Director for Child Care for Connecticut's Future. Thank you so much to both of you for being here. And what we want to discuss today is a few questions, and I'll put them out there for us to all chew on together. How did Alice families benefit this last session? What else happened that's helpful to them? What's left unfinished? You know, what do we need to pick up and keep carrying forward together? What should we pay attention to moving forward? And then also just want to get your wisdom and your inspiration on why advocacy matters. For people who are already involved, how can we help remind them of why we're in this together? And for people who may not have been able to find the time to invest in advocacy this last session, what can we say to them to help them find the energy to join us and keep moving forward? So who wants to go first?
I guess I'll kick it off and start with thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this conversation and expanding the conversation beyond the line items that we were fighting for and going into other topics that help children and families. So the what else was accomplished, right? We have to first and foremost take a step back and appreciate that despite it being a very difficult session, as illuminated by others on this call, there were victories. You know, we might have not gotten everything we would have gotten, but with the fiscal constraints that Lucy Nolan mentioned earlier, we were still able to get close to 25 million new dollars into childcare, early care, help those parents who are on Care for Kids and were on a waiting list, and we're waiting for 6-7 weeks to try to find subsidized childcare and remove that waiting list. There are other countless legislations that help children and family that, as I like to coin, creative solutions, right? Creative solutions in a very difficult climate that still help those families. And even though we might not have quite convinced all of the legislators who are currently elected in the state of Connecticut that maybe doing other creative solutions with the fiscal constraints is a path forward for next year, we are convincing many legislators that supporting children, supporting families is definitely a path forward, and making sure that we're doing that with similar legislations like 5002, SB 14, or SB 2. But I'll pass it over to Janae.
Thank you, Ava. I agree. It is important for us to recognize that even though this was a challenging session in so many different ways, we did in fact have some victories. And a major victory that will be of great benefit to Alice families is the passage of House Bill 5005, an act expanding paid sick days in the state. When we talk about Alice families, we are in fact talking about families who are employed, who work very hard, but unfortunately tend to be congregated in jobs where they lack basic worker protections. So expanding paid sick days so that all workers in the state will be able to earn time off and will no longer have to choose between taking time off to care for themselves or a loved one when they're facing a short-term illness, or make a choice between that and their paycheck, is a huge step forward for our state. It is putting money into the pockets of people who work really, really hard. And it means the difference between having to do without the basic necessities that they might need if they were not able to have those few extra hours of paid time off. It's an incredible step forward.
Thank you, Janae, and thank you, Eva. That's so helpful to remember that there are these multiple areas that touch Alice families, and it's a privilege. And I do want to say one of the great, I think, steps forward that many of us were able to take together this last session was to work in closer coalition with a number of organizations. And Janae, I'm going to shout out to you because you have been part of helping forge multi-organization coalitions to pull the same direction. Can you just talk about that and talk about what we've achieved together in that area?
We've achieved a lot. And it comes from a common recognition that so many of the issue areas we are working on are intersectional. People who struggle with lack of access to paid sick days are also people who struggle with lack of access and lack of funding for healthcare. These are the same folks whose children do not have access to the meals that they need at school. All of these issues are tied together. And so when we are advocating for the same people who are impacted, it makes sense for us to come together to pull in the same direction. It makes sense for us to act together in solidarity when we are up at the Capitol. It makes sense for us to message together when we're trying to build support in grassroots community to help people understand how none of these issues stand alone. They are all deeply intertwined, and they are all the result of policy choices. So if we have made policy choices that have created this kind of situation, then coming together, we can make better policy choices to create a better way of living for all of us.
That's so well put. And Eva, can you talk a little bit more about the incredible new energy that your coalition has brought to advocacy around childcare?
So I do want to give a shout out to She Leads Justice and Janae's organization and their work. And I do the shout out. I know she's here and she's blushing because oftentimes when you're doing advocacy work and you're doing it year after year, and I know many of the listeners here are part of that advocacy work, it's hard, right? It gets very frustrating and exhausting, and you're trying to look for that energizing, that re-energizing. And She Leads Justice definitely brings it every single year. So in our new coalition, She Leads Justice is also part of that coalition, as well as United Way partners, the Early Childhood Alliance, All Our Kin, Circle. We have 70 plus different nonprofits and organizations who are part of the Child Care for Connecticut's Future Coalition. And that energy, right? Taking away the victories from paid family leave and the authority being created and saying, wait a second, we're helping families and we're definitely supporting people who need the most help in our state. But when we're looking at the focus specifically on early care and education, we haven't had the opportunity in the last 2 decades to just concentrate our energy on one specific conversation of funding for early care and education. So our coalition was literally conceived with that in mind. All of these nonprofits who are doing amazing work throughout the state of Connecticut for years and years, saying we're going to create something that is unique. We're going to come together, put our differences aside, and be able to have that conversation with parents that they already know their frustrations and be part of that advocacy so we can build something. And that's what we've been able to accomplish. Again, this year maybe might not seem like the biggest victory that we could have imagined because of the very difficult monetary reasons behind it. But in total, in the last 3 years of our coalition existing, we've been able to advocate for close to $650 million new dollars in the early care system. And that is nothing to shy about.
I love that you said that, Eva, because we tend to focus on winning everything all at once. Like that is the ultimate goal. That rarely happens. It almost never happens. Small victories are still victories. Incremental change is still change. And it's positive change as long as we continue to center the people who are most impacted in that work every time we take a step forward in making that incremental change. So while we do need to keep that energy up, we also need to remind ourselves that we must have patience. And this is where I like to channel our friend, our colleague, Emily Byrne, who is the leader of Connecticut Voices for Children. She always says that we need to be impatient about injustice, but we need to be patient about strategy. And I think that's so brilliant. And it's a mantra. It's a mantra for all of us because incremental change is still change. And sometimes it isn't until you're able to look back over the last several years that you realize you've actually done a lot, even though on the day-to-day, it feels like very little. And sometimes, to be honest, it feels like nothing. But look at what we actually have done. We now have the paid leave authority. We have raised the minimum wage. We have paid sick days for everyone. We are funneling new dollars into early childcare. We have done a lot. There's still a lot more to do, but we are making progress.
That's fantastic, Janae. I love the way that you put that, and I'm glad that you cited Emily and those very wise words that she shared. And I think one of the big victories that we are all managing to create is to put front and center these important issues and to make it impossible for legislators to ignore them or to work around them. Say, okay, we've got to do more on childcare. We've got to figure that out. It is a fact, right? Similarly, on paid leave, Janae, over several years, and together with your leadership, making sure that the idea of more universal paid leave was an immovable object that they had to contend with, right? And for us, this past session as well, making sure that the child tax credit is a central part of the discussion about how, not if, but how changes will be made in the Connecticut tax code. And I love what you said, we don't get there all at once. And especially in Connecticut, every state is a little different, and Connecticut in particular tends to favor incremental change. And so we know that, and we have to keep working. But I want to circle back to a question and ask each of you to speak to it. For anybody who has joined us or may watch this later and just hasn't been able, out of their busy life, out of multiple different priorities that they have to juggle, they haven't really engaged in advocacy with as much energy as maybe some of our other colleagues here. What would we say? How do we inspire them? What can we say?
I guess I'll go. I unmuted first. I first would say we are not, we meaning advocates who are front and center in these conversations are not the motivator to inspire you. So I'm looking at you, right? The person watching and listening, and you're thinking, what? I say that because the inspiration is your story. We are not experts in the day in and day out that you live. Only you are, and only you know how far your bandwidth is. So if you're the single mom, if you are the parent of 4, the couple, you know, the couple who just adopted a child, and you're looking for real solutions to make your current chosen reality work, you have to find a path that makes sense for you. And know that something that we do well, we, the advocates on this call and these amazing organizations who do this work, something we do really, really well is meet you where you're at. There's so many nonprofits here in the state of Connecticut that collaborate well together. And as Lisa just said, incremental change is definitely the nature of the beast here in Connecticut. We are the land of steady habits. That includes, you know, really hard to find new habits. But because these nonprofits have teams and organizers and experts there to guide you, to give you trainings, research, or, you know, if you see an email and you know someone is another parent in need, share the information. The first step is have the conversation, know what degree you want to get involved, and then share that information. And slowly, if you do have more time and more capacity, we're there. We've got you. And we're going to hold your hand each step of the way because your story and your narrative is an inspiration.
I love that, Ava. And I will also add on to that and say that politics and policy are going to happen to you whether or not you choose to participate. So it's in our best interest to participate. And like Ava said, the level of participation is up to you, what you have the bandwidth for. And Ava is correct. You are invited to participate in any way that you can. And we can train you as well. You don't need to know how to do legislative advocacy. You don't need to know how to lobby. We have lots of training available. We have community organizers who will come out and meet you where you are in your community and talk to you about what you need to do to share your story, because you are the expert on your own lived experience. You know what's going on in your family and your community. You know what solutions are needed for you to live the life that you deserve. So we really do encourage you to participate. And that can be as simple as just sending an email or picking up the phone and telling your state representative that you want them to vote a particular way on a bill. That only takes a few moments. It could be sending a postcard. The level of engagement can vary from something taking a few minutes to something taking several hours. There are lots and lots of opportunities. So please do follow us on social media. We will inundate you when the time comes with opportunities to be involved. And I think that you can also not only take inspiration from your own life, from your own story, but also know that collectively, all together, we are the people who do inspire the legislators to make change. It is everyday people who show up to the Capitol to advocate, people just like you, who inspire the legislators to vote the right way on these bills. The Paid Sick Days Coalition was made up of women, a lot of moms, people of color, LGBTQIA folks, working class people, people living in poverty. Those are the folks who showed up time and time again. Some people showed up for a whole day. Some people showed up for a few days. Some people sent one postcard. But all together, collectively, we were powerful. So it's up to you to decide what your bandwidth is. But what's important is that you do participate, no matter how much you participate.
Thank you, Janae. Thank you, Ava. Beautifully said, both of you. And I think what I take away as well is the need for all of us to work together to, as you both said, meet people where they are and make it as easy as possible for someone who's already stretched, working one job or two jobs, raising small children. Make it easy for them to raise their voices. And I know that we are all committed to trying to do exactly that and to do it better every session. That's terrific. Thank you. And Daniel, shall we go to some questions?
That sounds great. And I actually want to sort of answer your question, Lisa, too, and bring the other panelists back to kind of answer your question as well, which if I'm hearing it right, Lisa, it was kind of like, what can we do, right? Like, what are some real actionable steps we can take? The legislative session just ended, but the next one has really just started. The preparations for it, all legislators, all of your elected officials have just become candidates, and they're running for re-election. There's an election this fall where they'll all be on the ballot. So I'll just I'll answer, and then I'd love if Lucy and Tanya had an idea as well, sort of actionable steps. While folks, if you have questions to ask any of these amazing people, just drop them in the chat and we will respond to them. But what came to mind for me, Lisa, when you asked the question is the work we're doing behind the scenes to update the ALICE research and reports for the fall. And so I know that's sort of planning ahead a little bit, but plan ahead some time to take that information and give it right to your elected officials. And we are focused on state conversations, but you could take it to town hall too, and let folks understand that there are crises happening in your community. There are people who are not stable financially, or as Maria brought up, emotionally. their children who are struggling with poverty. So, if you see that data, it's hyper local. You could take it down to the town level. You could take it down to your district for your senator or house member. And, it's fine when it comes from folks like us, and it does all the time. But when it comes from a direct constituent like you, and it might take 5 minutes to do or 10 minutes to do, but it's actually extremely valuable 5 or 10 minutes to give them that information. I don't know, Lucy or Tanya, if you have sort of one of those kind of like, what's one thing I hope everybody here does between now and when the next session starts, which is in January?
So I guess, Tanya, if you don't mind, that for me, it would be to make sure that legislators do hear. I'm along with you here, Daniel, because what we found for that brief moment in time when there were free meals and then they were not, and then they came back, there was just a storm of parents and kids responding to legislators, and it made a difference. We got the rest funded for that year. So I think we have to make sure that people understand it's important to your family and it's important to you. And you can work with your food service director. They're happy to work with you on this. Invite a legislator to eat with your kid one day in school, see what it's like, because the meals are good. We hear a lot because kids are kids and they're going to complain about everything, right? So I think really make sure that getting free meals at school is normalized because it's so important to our educational system. Kids don't learn if they're hungry.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, Tanya, do you have a one step advice? One tip?
Yeah, one step advice would just be to spread the word about 211 to your friends and family members as a place where people can turn if they need help finding what resources are available. And I just want to call out that, in addition to our phone line, there is the website 211ct.org that people can access. But we know for many people, they need to speak to a human, right? And that it's not enough for some of our families who are juggling lots of things to just go by what they see on a website. And so that's why 211 is important, and the funding for our core information and referral work is important, is to be that human touch and voice at the other end of the line that can work with families.
Yeah. Can I ask one more question for everybody too? And this might be obvious to some, but I mentioned that we're surely on track to keep fighting relentlessly for the Connecticut Child Tax Credit. I was wondering if there are other specific policies that come to mind that you all are already working on in advance of next legislative session, right? What are those things that you're like, already we're talking to folks about this, we're building advocacy circles around this? Just what comes to mind for you for next session?
I'll jump in and say that for our childcare coalition, we're looking for general additional funding for childcare. And for 2025, and we're even looking at 2027, we expect to have legislative leadership, hopefully sign on to a very specific bill that funnels some money, specific funding, defined revenue sources for childcare. And I will also add for anyone listening who is allergic to politics and they hear the word legislative and they're like, oh God, that sounds really scary, that statewide politics in the legislative session here is very different. The dynamics are very different than federal. And there's a lot more alignment and collaboration with our local legislators than when we're talking about, the DC politics. So hopefully you're not allergic. Having a conversation with your legislator to echo Lucy in the municipal level and your state reps, your local state reps and state senate is always a helpful thing to do. And they're usually pretty accessible.
That's a great point.
That's fantastic, Ava. Thank you for that, because I think we would all love to keep working toward that North Star of no more than 7% of income that anyone would have to spend on childcare. And imagine what a different landscape that would be for the families that we all have at the front of our mind. So thank you for your hard work on that, and thanks for lifting it up again.
Any
Janae,
other
what about you?
priorities? Yeah.
Well, we are still celebrating our big win around paid sick days, and we will be thinking about Know Your Rights workshops so that all of the folks who previously did not have access to paid sick days will
Mm.
now be able to get information about this new benefit that they will have. And we will start thinking about building out our policy agenda for next year, centering women's economic security, family economic security. So of course, we will be continuing to think about and supporting the child tax credit as well. But stay tuned. There'll be a lot more coming.
Absolutely. Well, not seeing any more questions. Lisa, you want to wrap us up and send us off, and also just, you know, my gratitude, first of all, for you all for being here as speakers, but also everybody joining us live and watching us later on. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much to our terrific guests. It's really uplifting to come together and think together about this important work and the families that we all together serve. So thanks to everybody for joining us today. And you know, whether you're an advocate, a service provider, a legislator, or an Alice family joining us today, your presence in this discussion is a testament to the collective effort required to make change. We really hope that this recap helps you to understand what did happen this past session and to think together with us about where we can go together in the next legislative session to keep moving towards better and better conditions and support for Alice families across our state. Together, we are making an impact, as you heard, and there's more work to do. And we hope that you'll join us. We hope you'll stay with us. And our commitment to you is to make your advocacy time as easy as it can be and to help you with the tools that will make the best use of your precious time. So thank you. Please stay in touch with us. And again, we appreciate very much your commitment of time to be here. Bye-bye.